Have you ever felt that you simply had to do something for the sake of those you care about? Most likely the answer is yes. At some point in time or another, we all feel this need, this pull, this responsibility. But there comes a point when this feeling of responsibility becomes unhealthy. When it veers off course from being responsibility and becomes codependency. But what is codependency? Is it seriously a bad thing? And if so, what can we do about it? Join me today as we crack open the research into codependency's ins and outs on Your Mind on Codependency. Welcome back, everyone, to another week here on the Your Mind On podcast, where each week I, John Shaw, dig into the research on a psychology topic and then share the information with all of you and how it relates to everyday life. If this is your first time listening, welcome. I hope you find the episode as interesting and fascinating as I did during the research, and hopefully you'll take the time to share it with friends and family that might like the podcast as well. This week, we're digging into the third episode in a completely unintentional series that started with the episode on gaslighting, which was followed by narcissism last week. In the logical flow, it only seemed right to follow up with codependency since all three tend to relate to each other so much. When codependency was first identified and defined, it was mostly used to describe someone that was in a relationship with an alcoholic or another addict. Many people stay in relationships with an addict out of feelings of responsibility and that they have to change this person. A lot of the things that these people do don't take into account their own feelings or emotional health. They do it to fix the other person, like making excuses for them or pouring out their alcohol and so on. But over time, the behaviors that were being identified here started to apply to other relationship situations. And not just romantic relationships, but any relationship, including the relationship with parents. So let's take a look at codependency. And if you find that you maybe fit inside this framework, don't worry. There are things you can do and there is help you can get. And we will talk about those. So let's start with a more textbook definition. While codependency is not an actual diagnosis according to the DSM-5, it is a learned emotional and behavioral condition that affects a person's ability to maintain healthy, mutually satisfying relationships. It's often thought of and referred to as a relationship addiction and involves a persistent pattern of prioritizing other people's needs above your own. Now, a big part of being in a relationship is taking care of each other. It means sometimes you put your needs aside for your partner or the other person in the relationship. But with codependency, it goes beyond that. Way beyond that, in fact. It is widely recognized by experts as a really dysfunctional relationship dynamic that most often shows up as an extreme reliance on others for self-worth, identity, and approval. When someone is codependent in a relationship, they tend to lose their independence and believe that they must fix or tend to the other person in order to feel secure, not just in the relationship, but in life in general. So, how do you know if you or someone you know is a codependent? Well, there are a few things that can strongly point to it. First is low self-esteem. Codependent people in a relationship often feel like they're worthless unless they have the approval of the other person. When they're alone, they usually feel like they just aren't enough, and they are usually really critical of themselves internally. Another key indicator of codependency is having a lack of boundaries. Their mood usually depends on the other person. They can only feel happy and relaxed if the other person in the relationship is happy and relaxed. Another example of this lack of boundaries is the ability to say no, or the lack thereof. It's pretty much impossible for a codependent in any relationship, even when they are being asked to do something that is just completely draining for them. Codependents also have problems with people-pleasing and compliance. A true codependent will stay in a problematic situation because they're afraid of rejection. They will apologize for things that are out of their control, and they will even go against their own personal values just to avoid conflict. They will put aside their own wants and needs in favor of tending to the other person, and may even go into denial about how bad the relationship actually is. And finally, control is a big aspect of codependency. Now, like I talked about in the narcissism episode, this need for control might seem completely out of line with the rest of the characteristics of codependency, but when you really look at the kind of control, it starts to make a lot more sense. A codependent has a strong feeling that they need to manage or rescue people from the consequences of their own actions. They feel responsible for making sure that the other person does not self-destruct, so a codependent will attempt to control situations to avoid just that, which in turn enables more bad behavior from the other person. This is the aspect that appeals so much and so strongly to narcissists. A narcissist, when in a relationship with a codependent, gets all of their needs fulfilled, and they don't have to worry about consequences. Experts tend to lump codependents into one of three helper categories. While codependents don't always fit into one of these categories, generally they will fit into one of the three, and occasionally they'll fit into more than just one. The first is the caretaker. The caretaker codependent will always put everyone's needs above their own. They always feel that it's their job to make sure everyone has what they need. The caretaker will usually feel that if they don't make sure the other person in the relationship has their needs met, then that person's going to fail or fall apart. This is often the kind of codependency that people might find themselves in when it comes to relationships with parents. They will feel that if they aren't there to schedule appointments, do the grocery shopping, or clean the house, then it's not going to get done and their parents' health is going to suffer. The next category is the rescuer. The rescuer codependent seeks out relationships where they feel like the other person needs to be saved from their own actions or from the situation that they're in, especially protecting them from having to take accountability for their own situations. I think it's pretty easy to see how this mindset checks the box for a codependent's sense of self-worth. I mean, everyone loves a hero, right? And the final category is the enabler. Like I said when I was talking about relationships with alcoholics or addicts, the enabler will make excuses for bad behavior. The codependent will see a loved one as a diamond in the rough, so they just need to forgive bad behavior sometimes. They will usually believe that slips happen and that it'll be better next time if they just work harder to keep the other person in line. Looking at codependency in this light, in the categories and signs, I think it can be really easy to see that most of it is just extreme versions of normal feelings and thoughts in a relationship. To some extent, we all feel the pull to protect our loved ones. We overlook small things in the hope of change, to take care of each other's needs. But it's amplified to such an unhealthy level with a codependent. For most of us, we know that there comes a point with all of this where we have to draw a line to protect ourselves. Drawing those lines or setting those boundaries is virtually impossible for a codependent. So, where does it come from? Typically, codependency starts to develop in childhood. Children that grow up in homes where needs are repressed, their caregivers are inconsistent, or had to step up into a caregiver role for a parent that's struggling with mental health issues or substance abuse will start to develop the traits of codependency. Often this comes from having a parent that's a narcissist. See, these children, they aren't able to break free or even understand the toxic relationship they have with a narcissistic parent. And so children, as they do, adapt. They will do everything in their power to receive affection from the parent, so they will bend over backwards to please this parent, even ignoring or disregarding their own emotional needs. It becomes a way of life, the only relationship dynamic they know. Then, as they grow into adults, without even realizing it, they will seek out relationships that fit that same dynamic because that's all they know love to be. See, healthy relationships are what they call interdependent. This means that while partners will work to take care of each other, they still keep their own identities and their own sense of self. Codependent relationships involve one person losing or giving up their own identity for the sake of the relationship. To help really paint the picture of the difference, let's consider this scenario. Imagine a married couple. One day, one of the partners comes home with the news that they've been offered a big promotion at work. It's going to be a huge bump in pay, and it's everything they've ever wanted in their work life. However, accepting means that they're going to need to move across the country. So the other person in the relationship is going to have to quit their job and find a new one after the move. In an interdependent relationship, a healthy relationship, the scenario should play out something like this. The couple sit down together and openly discuss the pros and cons of accepting the position. They both acknowledge that it is a great opportunity for one, but there's going to be a lot of change for both. They will have to leave what they know behind, including friends and family. So they agree to talk more about it and look at the job market in the new city. Maybe they even look at the housing market too. In the end, they ultimately make a joint decision based on the needs and wants of both partners. Neither of them has to feel like they're completely sacrificing their life just for the other person to be happy. Now, in a codependent relationship, this scenario is going to look a lot different. When hearing the news of the promotion, the codependent partner will be instantly willing to drop everything in their own life to make sure that this happens for the other person. The codependent is going to seem happy, almost giddy with the news, but inside they're an emotional wreck. They worry that their partner's going to go no matter what. So regardless of how the codependent person feels inside about giving up their job, giving up their friends and their family, giving up their house, that need to be a people pleaser takes over, and they agree no matter the sacrifice that they have to make. In the end, they make the move. And over time, the codependent might even start to feel burnt out or even start to feel resentment toward their partner because now the codependent has tied their own sense of worth and identity to the partner's success at work. But, let's circle back a little bit to codependency and how it develops, because it doesn't have to come from a narcissistic parent. Sometimes it's simply learned by having to tend to parents that are suffering addiction or mental health issues, like I said. It can also simply come from parents that don't show proper amounts of affection. Or what might come as a surprise, it can come from parents who are codependent themselves. Children often learn behavior from watching their parents. So if one of the parents is codependent and enabling toward the other parent, the child will see this as the proper dynamic for a relationship. It can also be learned later in life through dysfunctional relationships, although this is less common. Usually there's some building blocks that are already in place for codependency by that point. Of course, Codependency doesn't have to be just in romantic relationships or in relationships with parents. It can take shape in relationships with siblings or other family members. It can show up in friendships and even in the workplace. So let's see how that looks. In relationships with other family members or friends, it might not be easily seen at first, but it usually takes the form of being an enabler. Like that one family member or friend that overspends and then asks for help paying their rent. Now, of course, this happens from time to time. I mean, we're all human and we make mistakes. But when your friend starts asking every few months for help, and you begin to feel like if you don't help, that they're going to find themselves homeless, so it's your responsibility or duty for you to help them out, this is where codependent behavior starts. While you're being helpful and saving them from a bad situation, you're also giving them permission to continue to overspend and ask you for help because you'll always be there to help. So if this is a pattern that you find yourself in, you need to establish better boundaries. This can be hard if you don't want to lose the friendship, but there are ways. Offer to help one more time, but then after that, you won't be able to help financially again. You can offer to help them by reviewing their budget and helping them get a better plan on their finances. Really, in this instance, you need to keep in mind the old saying, give a person a fish and they'll eat for a day. Teach them to fish and they will eat for life. But you also need to be prepared for the event that they are simply using you as a financial crutch, and that if you no longer help them, they might cut the friendship off. And that's a hard reality to face, but honestly, if that's the case, it's going to hurt, but they're showing their true colors. They never were a true friend. At work, this can be a bit more difficult because, work has certain power dynamics. So let's see what it can look like with a real world example. So when I first started working at my current job in IT, we would occasionally get notified of meetings that were scheduled that needed some extra configuration for the conference rooms. They would need the conference room to be rearranged, which meant moving tables, chairs, and the IT equipment. Of course, this meant that I would be on the list of people to help since I would need to move the IT equipment. But for the furniture, the people that wound up being tasked with that were the administrative assistants. Well, in this case, these were both women that are on the older side, one of them nearing retirement age. And in my mind, I realized that I was younger and physically stronger, and that it just wasn't fair that these women were being tasked with such a physically demanding job. So I would go to the conference room early in the morning, and I would do all of the rearranging. After a few times of this, it kind of became an expectation that I would rearrange all of the furniture for these meetings. And I got frustrated because it was outside of my job description, but I just couldn't bring myself to allow the responsibility to fall on these older women. I was angry because there were plenty of younger people that could be tasked with this, but no one was ever tasked with helping, so I just kept going. Until one day when I realized the codependent nature of what I was doing. So the next meeting notification that came, I went and moved the IT equipment, and I left the furniture to the administrative assistants. Now, I felt really horrible doing this, but I needed to establish that boundary for myself. Instead of doing the work myself, I would casually mention the unfairness of it to other staff. Eventually, they started getting more help from the younger people in the office that were tied to the meeting. So with work, it can be a really delicate situation. So you have to come up with a tactful way of approaching it. Maybe your boss asks or tells you to do something that's outside of your job description. Saying no isn't always an option. But you do need to protect yourself and not enable poor behavior by other people. So how do you push back without risking your job? Well, in a healthy work environment, you should be able to schedule a meeting with your boss, explain the situation, and emphasize that you don't mind helping out with these things outside of your job description from time to time, but that it simply isn't going to work for it to always be your responsibility. Work with your boss to come up with a new plan that's more fair and beneficial. I'm sure a lot of people listening might be feeling like this is a terrible idea, that your boss would never accept this, and that you're probably going to be risking your job if you try. This is why I say you need to bring it up very formally and also very delicately. If they're not responsive to the idea, then you'll likely just need to go along with the request, but it could be time to start looking for a different job. Of course, you could always take the issue to HR, but again, a lot of people will feel like this is just going to rock the boat. The simplest way I can state the best way to respond is that you have to look out for your own best interests, physical health and mental health. Take from that what you will. By now, you might be thinking that some of this feels a little bit too on the nose. So what if you have, or at least think that you have, been in a codependent relationship? What if you find yourself hearing all of this and have that kind of scratching feeling in the back of your brain saying, maybe I am? What do you do? There are two big important steps that you need to take. First, talk to your mental health counselor. If you don't have one, find one and make an appointment. Your therapist will be able to help you really identify if you are showing codependent tendencies, and then they can help you begin working through them. And, I'm not sure if I have said this recently or exactly this way, but there is no shame in talking to a counselor. A lot of people tend to think that you only go see a mental health professional if you're broken, and that's simply not the case. Going to see a professional doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. They aren't going to recommend that you check into a mental hospital. They aren't going to immediately start throwing out diagnoses and prescribing medication. A counselor is often just a sounding board. Their job is to listen and provide some feedback or insight to help you make sense of whatever it is you're struggling with. Even at the best of times, you can greatly benefit from talking to a mental health professional. You go to a doctor once a year at least for your annual checkup, right? Not because you're sick, not because something inside of you is broken, but it's just to get an assessment. It's to make sure that you're healthy and bring up any concerns that you might have. You need to think of a counselor in the same light. The second big step that you need to take is to seek out your local chapter of Codependence Anonymous, or CODA. CODA takes on much the same format as Alcoholics Anonymous. It is a group therapy session, just like you've seen in the movies or TV, people sitting in a circle and talking about their experiences. And I know this can be intimidating and uncomfortable. Trust me, I get it. But give it a shot. Go and just sit in. You can listen until you're ready to talk, and that doesn't have to be during the first meeting. It doesn't even have to be during the second meeting. Just go and listen to what others have to say. Hear their stories, their setbacks, their successes. You will certainly hear a lot that will make you reflect on your own life and maybe even help you open your eyes even further to the things in your life that you didn't realize are codependency. CODA has a workbook as well, and I highly recommend investing in it, both in the cost to buy it and in the cost of the time it will take you to work on it. You don't need to sit and try to do it all at once. In fact, a lot of the material in the book is designed for you to do one page and then step back and just let it sit and simmer in your head for a few days. Really reflect on it. If you try to rush through, you're going to miss a lot of the aspects of your life that are impacted by codependency and what the workbook is designed to help you with. Now, that seems like a lot of uncomfortable work to do, right? So, is it worth it? I mean, you might not feel like you have a debilitating disorder or an addiction or some behavioral issue that's greatly impacting your life, right? Well, sit and look at the flow of relationships that you've had in your life. If you start seeing a pattern of, I gave them everything, and in the end, I was left with only a broken heart. I put my life on hold. I put my dreams aside. If this is you, and you still aren't convinced to get help from a counselor in CODA, maybe this will get through to you. And I'm going to be completely blunt here. If you are codependent and you aren't working with a counselor or a support group to address the issue, the likelihood of you finding a long-lasting, meaningful, healthy relationship is next to impossible. If you think that the water on the floor is just how floors are, rather than understanding that there's a leak that needs to be fixed, your socks are always going to be wet and you're going to be miserable. If you have had this revolving experience with relationships where it feels like all you do is give and give and give, only to be tossed aside afterward without any kind of fulfillment for yourself, you're going to continue that cycle until you find yourself in a bad relationship and choose to stay just so you can keep the relationship and not be alone. Get help. Talk to someone. Reach out to me even if you need a starting point and just don't have it in you to make an appointment with a counselor or attend a meeting. I'm happy to listen and share my own insights and experiences with you. In the end, you're going to be glad that you talked to someone, that you addressed this issue and made that change in your life. And moreover, your kids or the kids that you will have in the future are going to be glad you did. And you're going to be helping to shape their future to be free of codependency as well. And I think that wraps up codependency for us this week. I know this episode was a bit shorter than most, but last week's episode was a fair bit longer than usual, so I think it balances out well. I really hope that you've learned a thing or two along the way today, and I hope that you find that if you do show some signs of codependency, that you're going to reach out to someone and start getting the help you need. It is a rough road, but in the end, it's worth it. Just like it is working through any mental health issues. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to download, follow, rate, and share it with your friends and family. This podcast doesn't get as many listeners as I'd originally hoped for, but that's fine, because if it helps just one person out there with the information that I share, then I'm perfectly satisfied. And the more people that hear the show and listen, the more people we can help with whatever issues they're facing. Don't forget, you can send an email to the show if you have comments, questions, or even topic suggestions at hello@yourmindonpodcast.com, via Instagram at yourmindonpodcast, or you can get more information on the website, yourmindonpodcast.com. Usually this is the part of the show where I tell you what topic you can expect next week, but this week I'm keeping it as a surprise. Okay. I'll be honest. I have several good topics in mind. I just need to figure out which one is speaking to me the most this week. So with that, I'll once again say that you absolutely should start working with a mental health counselor, regardless of what's going on in your life. You're only going to grow from it. Once again, thank you for listening today. I'm John Shaw, and remember, understanding your mind is the first step to changing your life. Until next time, be kind to yourself.